right, welcome back. So we're going to be talking about incentives for researchers in our last section. So, we talked a lot about setting up a research workspace, documenting your workflow, pre-registration, and we talked about how that can make your work more reproducible, more efficient, more easily build off of the work of yourself and your other collaborators and other researchers. But what are some other incentives that might exist out there, particularly incentives from journals that can maybe give us more motivation to engage in some of these practices? I'm specifically going to talk about 3 today. The first is badges for open practices. So this is something that has been taken up by psychological science in particular, since we're at APS conference right now. But the idea is to signal behavior, right? Make behaviors visible that we would like to promote. In particular, open data, open materials, and pre-registration. So how these work is if you are submitting to a journal that does badges, when your article gets accepted, you can then say, I would like to apply for the open data badge. Here is a link to my data publicly posted in a trusted repository. Or here is a link to my materials publicly posted in a trusted repository. If the journal decides that you have met the criteria for that badge, a little badge will appear on your article. That is the hard copy, the electronic copy, and the PDF. So you might say, Courtney, it's just a little badge, like a Girl Scout badge, and I don't get any cookies out of this arrangement. Like, why would I do this? So there are a couple reasons. One, it makes it very clear to people that there's other information in that article, right? If I'm looking through and I see articles that have data or materials attached to them, and I know that I'm interested in maybe doing a meta-analysis or building off some people's materials, that tells me that that's in there. I don't have to go searching for that anymore, right? Nowadays, it may be that you're putting links to data in footnotes or something like that, but nobody's seeing them because they're hidden in the article. This very clearly makes it visible to other people that I've engaged in a certain type of behavior. We also know that people tend to follow the norms that they think are out there in the community. So if everybody's data sharing, but it's not visible, it's hidden in those footnotes, I might think that psychologists don't really share their data, and that may make me less likely to share my data because I think that's the norm of the field. So these badges make it much easier to see how many people are sharing data. And so as I start to see more and more badges, that actually might make me more likely to share my data or share my material. So, right, we're scientists in this room. You're probably asking, does this actually work? So we just published a study in PLOS Bio actually looking at the effect of badges on open data and open materials. And so this, in particular, is the percentage of articles in psychological science that shared their data. The red line going down the middle is when badges were implemented. And what you see is this large increase in data sharing following the implementation of badges, right? And this is completely voluntary data sharing. If you compare that to what's going on in other journals at the time, you see that it's not just something about Special Ed 2014 where everyone decided they really should share their data. It seems to be something special about those badges that are promoting a certain type of behavior in the researchers who have access to those badges. So another type of incentives is something called registered reports. So we talked earlier about publication bias. So how peer review typically works right now is I design my study, I collect and analyze my data, I write up my report, I send it in for peer review, and reviewer number 2 does not like my study and rejects my article. How this is supposed to work is that the peer reviewers are supposed to be looking over my article and determining kind of its merit based on the interest of the research question, the validity of the methods, the soundness of the analysis. But what we talked about with publication bias is what is kind of creeping in is that whether I supported my hypothesis or not is actually having a large impact on whether my article ends up getting published. And this might be that it's affecting the reviewers directly, or it might be that I am actually kind of unconsciously changing my hypotheses to do that, and so the reviewers are getting more of one type of article or another. So what is the way around this? Well, one way is to literally move the peer review process. So in the registered reports format, what happens is I write up my intro, I write up my proposed methods, and I write up my proposed analysis plan. I send it into the journal, and peer review happens at that point. I can either be rejected, get a revise and resubmit, or get an acceptance. If my article is accepted, it's an in-principle acceptance. And what that means is as long as I do what I said I was going to do in terms of my study, as long as I analyze the data in the way I said I was going to, I can add exploratory analyses if I want, as long as they're very clearly labeled as such. my article will get published in that journal no matter what I find. So even if I find completely null results, if I went through the registered reports format, my article will get published. So here's a list of all the journals that currently have engaged in the registered reports format. There are actually a lot of nice options in psychology that are out there. Some of these journals, like Comprehensive Results in Social Psychology, are just registered reports format. Others of them you can apply to the journal as either a registered report or as just kind of a regular article. But I think this is a really nice, different publication option for researchers who are willing to do the pre-analysis and the pre-registration plans and try out this new kind of timeline for peer review. So the last incentive I'm going to talk about is the pre-reg challenge. So when we were talking about registrations, you saw that I brought up that template for the pre-reg challenge, and I said I'd talk about the challenge part in a little bit. So pre-registration is pretty new. It's been around in medicine for a while, but in psychology, this is a really new behavior. And we know that it can be hard to get people to try new behaviors, especially something that they may be a little unsure of. And so what the pre-reg challenge is, it is $1,000 for 1,000 researchers who pre-register an analysis plan on the OSF using that pre-reg template, and then go on to get it published in an eligible journal. So what is that $1,000 actually acting as, right? $1,000 is nice, but really what it's doing is trying to get people to try a new behavior, and then the pre-reg challenge is really more about an education campaign, right? There's that template there. It kind of walks you through what should be in a pretty thorough pre-registration. And at the center, we also help support you through that process. So what happens when you enter the challenge is you fill out that pre-reg template. When you click register, the contents of that is actually sent to my coworker, David Meller, who looks it over and kind of actually sends you back comments in terms of, here's maybe where you're missing some detail that you might want to have, or this looks great and it's now entered into the challenge. So you actually get to have a back and forth with somebody about what a pre-registration for your particular type of research would want to look like. Here's the webpage about the pre-reg challenge that goes into more detail in terms of kind of the eligibility criteria, how to enter, things like that. But I think it's a really nice option, one, to get chocolate money or pizza money, depending on what your vice of choice is. But even if you don't want to enter the challenge, you can use that template as well to kind of help you work through how you might do a pre-registration on your own. So there's no actual activity for the incentives, but we are going to take a little bit of time for Q&A around them if anyone does have any questions about anything that I mentioned.
Thanks for the presentation. I'm not sure if the journals who accept the badges already do this, but could there be a capability where in their search engines, if you can filter for the research that has these badges? And if they don't, do you think that's a good idea to do?
That's a good question. The discovery of data and materials and of who is sharing such things can be very useful. So what is a prototype right now at the center is a badge bakery. And what that means is that the digital image of the badge becomes embedded with information, digital information about who issued it, what it was issued for, who it was issued to, persistent identifiers like a DOI or the OSF ID if it's stored on OSF, so that those badges become digitally readable and can be discovered through search engines and can be aggregated, right? So we could, if lots of journals are now offering badges, we could easily aggregate through computational services which journals are promoting the most open data, which individuals are practicing most open practices. And people then could use that as a basis of saying, I do these things for tenure and promotion, for other sorts of things where they want to show what their own behaviors are.
We're now going to have 2 quick wrap-up slides and then open it up to questions in general, since we have some time for that. So Brian is going to take us home.
So thank you again for coming to this session. I hope it has been productive for you in finding some practical information about what it is that these services provide and how they might be useful for you in integrating with your daily research workflow. A key thing for us is to be getting feedback for what you need to make your workflow better. There is a team that is working on these tools and adding functionality, services, working on the workflow, trying to improve it so that you can do the best work that you can do as efficiently as possible. So just to preview a couple of examples related to the kinds of things that you experienced today, one of the features that will be released soon is that every project is automatically a mailing list. So you add collaborators to a project, and then that ID, that OSF ID with those 5 letters, is an email address where you send it to that address and all of your collaborators will get it. And so it automatically becomes a forum for the collaborators on projects to be able to exchange information. Now, the real value of that in terms of connecting the workflow is that all of those emails that now go to that discussion list are recorded in the project so that you can always rediscover what that conversation was and not miss that information where you have the data one place, the materials in one place, and the conversations outside of that in your email. So as we get features like these, we're hoping to get closer and closer to the ways in which you work normally with your collaborators and make it that much easier for you to be able to use those services and then be incidentally more reproducible in the way you do your work. And we're happy to talk about other things that are in development and then also ideas that people have for what they would like to see to make these things as useful as possible for them. So just to recap some of Courtney's primary points. The first implication of this is that the earlier you start in a project with documenting, the more savings you get in the long term. So the OSF in its ideal form is started at the onset of a project, that you start your research planning and use its services in order to maximize the coherence, the consistency, the longevity, the archiving of that work. You can use it in many other ways, and that can be useful too. So one of the things that has been happening in my lab is historical projects where we have the data or materials somewhere, but we haven't been curating it actively. We've been slowly creating projects to pull those things back in. It's a lot of extra work because now we have to remember what the project was for, how we did it, what these things are, and find it from the different places. So doing this now in advance for the projects that we've started anew is a lot easier, and we end up getting a lot more value out of it in our own research process. When you are doing or trying to do confirmatory research, the pre-registration services that the OSF provides is a means of providing some explicit and independent place to store, to register that information, that in fact I did make this research plan, this was the analysis approach I was going to take, and here is a certification of date and time of where I did it. When we were starting this in our lab of doing pre-registration, it was a very foreign concept, even though we thought of ourselves as doing hypothesis testing in our daily research. But when we actually had to say, what is it, how are we going to analyze these data in advance, it was hard because we weren't accustomed to thinking without access to the data right there. It sort of confronted us with the fact that a lot of our decisions of how we analyze the data are contingent on the data. We are in the data making decisions in real time. So it took some practice to do pre-registration in an effective way. And so where we started was, what can we do right now that's a little bit better than what we did yesterday? How might we enhance our pre-registration just a bit? So we think we have a plan. Let's just write down what we can write down in 10 minutes. What is it that we think this project is for? How do we think we're going to analyze this data in narrative format? And as we did that the first time and the second time, we were starting to anticipate some of the things when we went to analysis of things we could have said at the beginning. Oh, we could probably mention how we're going to deal with outliers. We know how we're going to deal with outliers. Let's write that down in the next one. And so each time we did a pre-registration over the first 6 or 7 cycles of them, the elaborateness, the comprehensiveness of those pre-registrations got better and better. But it took, if we had expected ourselves to do it perfectly right up front and anticipate everything that we were going to do, we may never have started at all. So we really think about this in incremental terms. Let's try to do today a little bit better than we did yesterday. And if we can write down just enough, then it's going to be that much easier the next time to do a little bit more. Then the third is in the same way. Data sharing, material sharing, it may be something that we can conceptualize as a good thing in concept, but how do we translate that into daily practice? How do we deal with the fact that there is many types of data sets where there are some variables that we cannot share? How do we deal with the fact that we might have data sets that are complex and have many things that we want to get out of them? What can we share? And so again, starting incrementally, thinking about these are the pieces that I can do easily, let's just do that. Then that's great. That is more than I did yesterday. And then each time we do it, there might be more things where we say, oh, actually, that ended up being a benefit to me to sharing that. Maybe I'll make more available for the next time. Okay, last thing to note, and then we'll be happy to have questions about any part of the program, is that we have a team that their job is to provide this as a service, to make it as effective and useful for you as you can. So you have multiple ways in which you can engage with the center for getting support for these services. One is to email statsconsulting@cos.io, and you will, with questions about power analysis, about statistical design, about an experimental approach, and you're not quite sure how to tackle this part of the methodology. That address is a free resource for people to try to address their statistical questions with the resources we have available, which is to say, Courtney. And so she will respond and she will provide what help she can or direct you to other services that she's been aware of for getting statistical support. And we have a lot of things online that supplement the direct one-on-one services that can provide. If you need help with the OSF, or you have suggestions, or you have challenges, or anything else, support@cos.io goes to another member of the team, and they process those and provide quick feedback on how you can solve that problem, or oh, that's a great idea, let's put that into our community team for consideration of product development. And then if you want the slides from this workshop, they are right there, osf.io, ZJ9AN. So you can get those, and you can get slides from a lot of the other presentations that are more about the substance and challenges of reproducibility of members of our team that they've been giving over the last number of years. So with that, we will close the official portion of the session in terms of presentation. We'll be very happy to have any questions about any aspects of this that you have. So, questions? Yes, please. There's a mic behind you.
Hi. Well, I think a lot of people, and most of us, I think, could agree, a lot of the problems that we face for rank and file scientists is really funding. And it seems like that pre-registering really, it has the possibility of also having a lot of crowdsourcing potential, too. You could probably add into OSF the potential to fund something that was, peer-reviewed. Really, people are behind it, they want to see it happen, but the researcher themselves, the people on the team might not actually have the funding for it. I think with Kickstarter and all these other crowdsourcing sites that are developing, that might actually be very helpful.
Yeah, a great comment about the needs for funding being one of the barriers for doing effective and reproducible research. There are some great sites out there. Kickstarter is one that's very well known for lots of different uses. Indiegogo, another one. There's also experiment.com, which is specifically for crowdsourcing and funding research. Our hope over time is to get them integrated into the OSF just like any other service. So you have a research idea that you're developing, you flesh out your plan, you say submit to Kickstarter, and then it automatically pre-populates the Kickstarter service so that you can advertise that as a campaign. And then people that are looking at it from the Kickstarter service can then say, oh, I want to go see what their actual research plan is. I want to keep up with their data as they collect it. And you make a commitment to them that they will be part of the research process. This is an imagination. This isn't actually happening yet. But our goal is to connect with these kinds of services to do exactly as you suggest, which is to make it easier to connect all of the different parts of the life cycle, right? Grant applications as well. There's a whole beast of a set of services for applying for federal grants that is very laborious and is entirely independent of the research workflow that you have and of the IRB process that you have, which is an entirely different service of exchange with your IRB at your institution. But really, the content of those is very similar. So if we can build connections to the IRB service at your institution and the granting agency to which you apply for funding, then we can provide a much more facile and speedy transfer of information across these and tracking those. because a lot of it just gets reused over time. But being able to track it and connect it will make it that much more efficient. So we're trying to do a number of things in the long term on these goals.
I'm the editor for a journal that recently went to registered reports as one of our options, and I guess we're struggling a little bit with getting the word out. People seem either not to be aware or not to want to try this. What suggestions do you have from a journal standpoint to try and enforce or implement some of these things?
It's a good question, and an important issue is just that these are unfamiliar. And especially with registered reports, it requires thinking about what journal should we send to at a very different point in time than what we ordinarily think of it, right? When we're launching a research project, we don't think, where are we going to publish it? And then we should submit something. This is very much after the fact that we do it. So part of it is to improve the engagement by just making people more aware of it. So one of the things that you can do is work with our team to do some advertising, promotion campaigns to make people aware. Other approaches we can talk about just in terms of strategy of just how to actually make this more aware and have a coordinated effort among multiple journals at the same time, sort of showing that these are possibilities, like through the PreReg challenge of saying yours is a journal where people can become eligible for that challenge and to get $1,000 in addition to pursuing this publication option.
Great. Thank you so much for coming today. It was a really great group, and hopefully you learned a lot. And if you have any questions afterwards, please let us know. Thank you so much.
Thank you.